Good evening and welcome to this session of the CIC. Today we have a very distinguished panel, and the panel is entitled Reflections on Governance. And no better person than Mr. K. M. Chandrashekar is here with us. He has worked in the Indian Administrative Service from 1970 to 2011. And during the last 4 years of his career, he held the highest position achievable in the Indian Civil Services, that of Union Cabinet Secretary, reporting directly to the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. After his retirement in 2011, he was offered a position equivalent to Cabinet Minister in his home state, Kerala, as Vice Chairman of the State Planning Board, which position he held for the next 5 years until 2016. He has varied experience, particularly in public finance and international trade, and has been Revenue Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Government of India. In the Ministry of Commerce, he has worked as Chairman of the Spices Board, of which he was the Founder Chairman, as Joint Secretary in the Trade Policy Division in the Ministry, and in 2 diplomatic assignments abroad. During his career, he has worked in several other areas, including district administration, agriculture, cooperation, industry, etc. He has diplomatic and negotiating experience as India's ambassador to the World Trade Organization, Geneva, and as Deputy Chief of Mission, Embassy of India, Brussels, dealing with the European Union, Belgium, and Luxembourg. He has been at various times Chairman, Managing Director, or Director of about 50 companies in the public, private, joint, and cooperative sector. He was on the boards of 10 companies, 8 of them in the Tata Group, and others in the healthcare sector. He has been Chairman of the Federal Bank, President of a Medical Research Institute and Hospital under the Department of Science and Technology, the Sri Chitrai Tirunal Medical Institute of Medical Sciences and Technology, Trivandrum, and has chaired in an elected capacity a prominent economic think tank, teaching and research institution, the Center for Development Studies, Trivandrum. He is a distinguished fellow of Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation. He is also honorary advisor to a prominent Ayurvedic institution, the Arya Vaidyasala, Kottakkal. He has written and published extensively in various newspapers and magazines, including the Times of India, the Indian Express, the Hindustan Times, the Economic Times, etc. He wrote for a year a weekly column for a web-based periodical, pennews.net. Today, we also discuss his memoirs, As Good as My Word, which has been published by HarperCollins India in December last year. Copies of the book are available, and people who want to get his signature, I think after the event, sir, we would request you. So it's my pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. K. M. Chandrashekar to the dais. Please. Joining the panel is another distinguished civil servant, Mr. R.K. Raghavan. Mr. Raghavan is a former director of the CBI who currently teaches criminal justice and policing at the Jindal Global University in Haryana. He was member of the International Board of Advisors at the Institute of Criminology, Cambridge University, UK, and he has many publications to his credit, including his memoirs, A Road Well Travelled. It's an honor to have you with us, sir. Please join us. To moderate this distinguished panel, we have Nirupama Subramaniam. She is the International and Strategic Affairs Editor of the Indian Express. She has earlier worked at the Hindu. She was the foreign correspondent in Sri Lanka for several years. She was the Hindu's correspondent in Pakistan. Nirupama won the Prem Bhatia Award in 2008 for her coverage of Pakistan, and Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Woman Journalist in 2009. After joining the Indian Express in 2015, she was resident editor at Chandigarh and later at Mumbai. She has written 2 books. The first is about Sri Lanka, and the second one is a work of non-fiction about a murder. She was recently conferred the Distinguished Alumni Award by Delhi School of Economics, from where she graduated in sociology. So, honor, ma'am, to have you. Please join us. I now hand over the proceedings to the moderator, Ms. Nirupama Subramaniam, to carry on the proceedings.
Good evening, friends. Today we are here to discuss Mr. K.M. Chandrashekhar's memoir, As Good as My Word. And you've already had the introduction. And I'm now going to start off the evening with by asking Mr. Chandrashekar to speak a few words about his book. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Subramaniam. Actually, the subject of the meeting today is not just my book. It is reflections on governance. And three of us are here, of which two of us were actually involved in administration, and Ms. Subramaniam in a very different way. She was watching us work, and she would have expressed her opinion pretty strongly on many occasions. Now, so I'm not going to talk about my book because I think you are going to talk about it, isn't it? The book.
You're free to say anything you want.
Yeah.
It's your day.
Okay. But you see, my intention in all these meetings, I had one at Bangalore, one at Delhi. The whole idea was that we must, all of us, think about governance. And we will have different views on governance. It's not that we must necessarily agree on everything. You'll have one view, I'll have one view. But democracy demands that we speak out and we think about it, so that what we do will lead to an enhancement in the performance of administration. And when I sit here, I see the panelists here, and I see some tremendous people sitting in front of me, so I don't know which is the panel, that side or this side. That's how it is. So it's people who have tutored me, people from whom I have learned. I would like everybody to participate in this session. It's not a very structured session that we are thinking of. We are simply thinking in terms of governance. So I'm going to talk about governance. It's not a book release because the book has been in the market for a few months now. And as I said in the very beginning, this is a completely open discussion. What is that? There is something called some house rules, no? Chatham House rules apply. I don't think there are any pressmen except Ms. Subramaniam here. So anyway, we can speak and we should speak frankly. As a matter of fact, as a democratic country, it is important that different perspectives are brought out into the open so that they can be resolved in a spirit of amicable compromise. I came across a remark by Sri Mohan Bhagwat recently, chief of RSS at Ahmedabad. He said, and I am quoting him, "One person, one thought, one group, one ideology cannot make or break a country. Good countries of the world have all kinds of thoughts. They also have all kinds of systems, and they are growing with this multitude of systems." So that I resonate with that line of thinking, and that is the basis of my writing also. Now, so far as my book is concerned, I would say that it sort of divides itself into three portions. The first is the learnings from my career. The second, which I think is very important for us, is reflections on democracy, constitution, governance. And the third is some reflections on certain areas where the country needs to pay more attention in the years to come. On the first section, I have said that the civil service gives enormous opportunities, I'm sure Mr. Shivaraman will agree with me, to officers to achieve results in diverse areas. If they want to achieve results, then there are opportunities, there are openings for them. And many of the people present here, I can see, they have been in the service and they have achieved tremendous results, which is known even now. Not many of us, at that time in particular, even today, we would not think of projecting ourselves into social media or publicizing ourselves. But if you want to achieve real, concrete results that reach the people, the civil service still has a lot of opportunities. I've made some achievements. I have talked about my work at the Kerala Marketing Federation, about my work at the Kerala State Civil Supplies Corporation, my work at the Fisheries Department, and on the diplomatic front, where surprisingly, despite being an IAS officer, I think my best result was in the diplomatic field as ambassador to the WTO, and I don't know if Tirumurthy will agree with me. Perhaps he will. Anyway, she's here. Ah, good. Wholeheartedly support. Okay. Now, all these things where I have achieved results, I couldn't have done it myself. You see, everything depends on teamwork. Do you get the right people? Do you get the right people enthused? Do they work with you? Are you appreciating them? Are you giving the kind of freedom that they require? Do they feel confident that if they go ahead and do something, I'm there to back them? Now that is very significant throughout. And earlier in this, in a similar format which we had in Delhi, Amitabh Kant actually, he worked 2 or 3 times with me. He was speaking in those terms only of what he learned from me during the years he spent with me. And this is one of the aspects which he specifically mentioned. Then the other thing is that we live in a world of uncertainty. All of us, whether it is in office or at home or in the global scenario or in the national scenario, there is uncertainty. Now, when there is uncertainty, you must have the ability to take risks. If you don't take those risks, then the country is not going to progress, you're not going to achieve results. So, risk-taking without taking, sometimes the risks you take and you suffer for it also. But that happens everywhere in life. You take, life itself is uncertain. You plunge into something and you find it turns against you. But must you not plunge into anything? In that case, there will be complete standstill. So that is another point which I have emphasized in my book. Then, one area where I have specifically mentioned and where I very much regret having failed is that we have not been able to bring about systemic change in administration. You see, we have had a lot of commissions, a lot of committees, a lot of organizations, a lot of people studying little chunks of administration. Some small reforms have been suggested here and there. But it has, some of them have been implemented, some of them have been given up. But unless you are able to change the entire structure of administration from a process-oriented administration to a result-oriented administration, the results are not going to come. I tried it in Delhi. I tried what we call the result framework when I was cabinet secretary, the result framework document system, where each secretary would write down what he intends to achieve during the year. We used to assign weightages to that. And then he would also get the approval of the minister. Then this thing will go down to the lowest level. As a matter of fact, when I came to Kerala, I found that it was there even in a scientific institution, a result framework document. So it had percolated down a lot, but it did it died after I left. Because unless it is sustained, both bureaucratically and politically, it's not going to work. You see, this has been tried, result-oriented administration in the UK, in New Zealand, in Australia. It has worked, but that is because it was led from the top. The Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, led it. The Australian cabinet, the New Zealand cabinet led it. Unless there is a top-down approach towards a reform of administration and a real focus on results, it's not going to work. And then again, of course, with changing people, one bureaucrat succeeding another bureaucrat will have a different set of interests. So we'll go only that far. Am I talking too much?
No.
No.
You have 20 minutes.
Okay. How much have I covered?
About 9, 10.
That's all. So a lot of time. Then the other issue which I have been talking and which I think we should all discuss today and in the future is the question of democracy and constitutional values. I have attached a great deal of importance to that here. You see, to me, the reason why we are not Pakistan, we are not Sri Lanka today, the simple reason is that for 16 years after independence, we had Nehru, who was a strong believer in democracy and in the constitution. And also the fact that under the leadership of Ambedkar, a constitution was framed which brought together all the diversity in India. We are diverse ethnically, in language, in religion, in community. But to bring all that together and create a single constitution, that is an enormous and an immense job. And it is that constitution and that democracy that has helped us go through the entire period after independence. In fact, I have mentioned in my book, if you want, I can quote. Yeah. You see, this is from a book, as I quoted, India After Gandhi by Ramachandra Guha. He talks about Rudyard Kipling, who visited Australia, and a journalist asked him about the possibilities of self-governance in India. He said, "Oh no, they are 4,000 years old out there, much too old to learn that business. Law and order is what they want, and we are there to give it to them, and we give it to them straight." Now that was the belief. You see, the British really, when they left India, felt that Pakistan had a chance to succeed because religion was bringing them together. But India had very little chance. But India survived. India is what it is today. And we have made some terrific reforms through the mechanisms of democracy. I mean, something like the 1991 reform, when our entire economic thinking changed, when we set out on a completely different path. Now, that was done by a democratic government, a minority government. That is that is the kind of thing that democracy has brought about, adherence to the constitution has brought about. And it is very important that this system remains intact throughout. I mean, there have been people like Plato, you might have heard. Plato really believed, I mean, he was not a great fan of democracy, to say the least. He understood, I mean, I've quoted somewhere, I've taken it out somewhere, that yeah, that's right. Plato has said, he described democracy as when the poor win, kill or exile their opponents. That's democracy. When the poor win, kill or exile their opponents. There is liberty and freedom of speech plenty, and every individual is free to do as he likes. Of course, Plato had this concept of the philosopher king. And that philosopher king, it's very difficult to sort of create a philosopher king all of a sudden. But in many cases, tyranny has arisen out of democracy. Even Hitler's, he came out of a democratic background. The Weimar Republic was there. And from there, he came to the, he was appointed by the then, his name was Hindenburg, no? The president of Germany. He was appointed by him, and he got in at that point of time. So here we have to see that this creeping dictatorship should not be allowed to come in. And by creeping dictatorship, I read a book recently by one Frank Dicotter. He's a great sinologist, and the Chinese hate him because he's written a lot about Chinese communism. Now, there are things like cult of the personality that is built up. That is one element of creeping dictatorship. Creation of animosity against particular sections of the people. Anti-Semitism in Germany. Bolshevism in Mussolini's Italy. Kulaks and Trotskyites in Stalin's Russia. The construction of massive edifices. There is a still unfinished palace of the people in Budapest, which was supposed to commemorate Ceausescu's regime. And then slowly taking over of education and of culture. So these are elements which we have to guard against if we are to survive and to keep our democracy strong. India will remain as one, and India will remain strong only if we keep our basic values intact. Otherwise, we are all divided people. You speak one language, I speak another language. A third person speaks a third language. And we have different, we've had problems earlier, as you know. We had the Tamil, the Hindi problem. Then we had the Mandal agitation. Then we had the Khalistan issue. We have every kind of issue we have faced and we have overcome because we have found the strength within ourselves to somehow solve those problems. So I think that is one issue which all of us should discuss. Divisiveness will only lead to centripetal forces gaining prominence, thus weakening the country. I have also highlighted the danger of regulatory investigative agencies overstepping their limits and the damage this could cause to the fabric of the nation. The important point is that these agencies, when they really start operating at the lower level, you give them a free hand, you want a particular result out of them, you want black money to be controlled, etc. But at the lower level, he is going to find hundreds of other ways in which he can make money. So we have to be extremely careful about allowing these agencies from going out of control. And Mr. Raghavan is here. He has been director of CBI, and he has the experience in this regard, and he knows the problems. He has been in police for such a long time. Now, I have also mentioned that federalism is very important. Now, if we have been able to manage to bring GST into this country, it is through federalism. It is in the year 2000 that we set up the Council of State Finance Ministers. And continuously, from 1986 when the MODVAT came, then it went to the various other formulations of VAT, both at the central and state level. This progression has been going on. Until today, we have a full-fledged GST. If a similar track had been followed in case of agriculture, if we had, say, a council of state agriculture ministers, I think we could have had many more reforms in that sector than we have been able to achieve till now. We need not have run into all those problems of the farmers staying on the outskirts of Delhi for 1 year if all of us had come together. I think federalism is a very important aspect. To me, I have expressed my personal preference also for the return of central planning. That is because central planning, you can see the example of China. The whole thing was, I mean, if you do have that kind of a government, you need a strong central planning mechanism. I've quoted somewhere from Suresh Mehrotra here, who's given exactly this thing, this reference to the Chinese way of how they've been able to bring about liberalization through centralization. That's the, if we are to going in a particular path, you do require some degree of central planning and leaving everything to the finance ministry. Mr. Shivaraman may not agree, but or he may agree. Actually, he's too evolved an officer not to agree. Narayanan, I don't know. I'm sure you will also agree. The thing is, if you leave it entirely to the finance department, they tend to put more focus on the non-developmental aspects because they have to do that. You have to spend money on certain things. Now, if you're doing it through the Planning Commission, one, you're bringing all the states together through the National Development Council. Secondly, you are identifying jointly and with all the people in all the states areas of real importance, and you're working towards achieving those. You are fighting with the finance ministry. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Shivaraman, I remember very well the solid fights that used to take place between finance ministry and planning commission. There is a thing called gross budgetary support, which is the developmental aspect which goes to the finance commission, to the planning commission. And every year there used to be conflict, you know. How much amount? And it won't be that much difference, but huge fights. I remember once Mr. Chidambaram, after this fight with this Montek Ahluwalia, he called all of us. There are 6 secretaries in the finance ministry. He called all of us and he said, what do you think? This is impossible. Do you think I should resign? Then 5 of us said, you need not resign. 1 said, you should resign. So that's how it was. But meanwhile, I got a call from the Prime Minister's office saying that, I don't know how it got through to him, but that if he sends a resignation, please tell him that within 10 minutes, it will be sent up to the president. So anyway, that ended. We didn't develop any further. On the economic front, you know, generally I have great admiration for India. I think regardless of government, the people of India, there is a lot of resilience. Even during the pandemic, we invented ways of shifting into mask making, into oxygen. So many different paths, and the same thing has happened after the pandemic also. We have a great deal of resilience, but we need to interfere. There has to be timely fiscal and monetary policy changes to sustain the growth process. Sometimes that this happened particularly during the period before the pandemic, when the economic growth rate was plunging down. And I really thought at that time a demand focus was required. Instead, there was a supply focus all the time. So you need to be very clear in your mind that sometimes you require a supply orientation, sometimes you require a demand orientation, sometimes it's monetary policy, sometimes it's fiscal policy. All these things have to happen. 1 minute more only. Okay. All right. I've described the length in this at length the manner in which the 2008-9 crisis was handled. Then I've talked about science and technology, where I think a lot more needs to be done. We have every government, every party says we want to spend 2% on R&D, but they end up spending only 0.5%. It's just not developing. We need to put in more money into our scientific institutions. We need to give them more autonomy, just like we've given the Atomic Energy Commission and the Space Commission. Finally, I would say that the concept of the IAS as a steel frame is not relevant anymore. It was relevant only in colonial times, when they had to collect money for the colonial power, and they had to maintain law and order so that their government can go on. Today, our steel frame consists of the democracy and the constitution. And it is the combined collective strength of all of us that can ensure that this remains for good in this country. So this is basically what I wanted to say. I finished in 20 minutes.
I now request, after this very thought-provoking and in parts provocative speech or talk by Mr. Chandrashekar, I'd like Mr. Raghavan to speak about the book and his reflections on governance. So you have 10 minutes.
I thank the CIC, especially Chandramouli, for having invited me to this important discussion session. And normally I speak off the cuff without any written text, but today I thought I'd make a departure because this is a very serious subject. I don't want to sound rambling. It's nearly 2 decades since I hung up my boots as a civil servant, and I never dreamt that I would be ever asked to speak on such a serious subject as the civil service, its ramifications, and what it means to all of us. I'm happy that it's very heartwarming to listen to Mr. Chandrashekar. He's so positive. He's a true patriot, and he thinks greatly of what we have done till now. He doesn't say that all that we have done is good. There are a few flaws, but still the basic structure of the country remains intact despite all the diversity we have. I'm happy to listen to such a positive approach to a serious problem. I'm delighted to meet Mr. Chandrashekar and say a few words on his brilliant memoirs. He carries a lot of credibility as an upright civil servant without any flamboyance, where normally we tend to be very flamboyant, and the listener misses the wood for the trees. A quality that is fast vanishing, flamboyance, that is come to stay, and a quality that is fast vanishing in the present times because of an aggressive media and the growing belief that only that a low profile brings you only modest success in public administration, and advertisement of oneself is the right road to success. This is what many of the younger officers feel. I can't blame them because they live or work in an ambience which is full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Mr. Chandrashekar stands as an example for modesty and hard work. I'm not praising him since I don't know him at all. We are meeting for the first time, and I've heard so much about him. I'm happy that CIC has brought me to meet such a distinguished civil servant who should be a model, because very often we see a lot of civil servants at the higher level trumpeting their so-called achievements and not caring about the people. I am happy that I could see him. He stands as an example for modesty and hard work. Because if you read his book, he details all that he did without bringing himself to the fore. And he talks about various assignments in government and outside government, which should give optimism to many of our civil servants that there is a life after civil service and that you could still achieve a lot by way of doing good to the public. But that focus is totally lost. I shouldn't drop a brick by what's happening in our neighboring state the past 2 days. Everybody talks of so many portfolios, the attractive portfolios, and all that, without saying what the public wants. This is very, very disheartening, dismaying, but that's the order of the day. Every person who assumes power, be it the civil service or the political firmament, everybody talks about how much he should get, how powerful he should be, and so Mr. Chandrashekar sounds a different note. In a way, he has highlighted in his book the principal message of Bhagavad Gita: work is worship and concentrate on action without expecting any reward. Mr. Chandrashekar was has a successful career. He achieved whatever an IAS officer aspires for, foreign postings and the cabinet secretary's job. But behind all these was his desire to achieve goals for the benefit of the country. Having said this, I'm not sure whether he would have achieved all that he did in the current turmoil, current turbulent ambience, where each man for himself and he wants to say that he is great and that very little thought is devoted to the average citizen who suffers on various counts. Values are different from those he cherished when he worked. And it's easy to be critical. I would like to sound some kind of a balanced note that it's easy to be critical of the present state of affairs. But then there is now a low emphasis on truth and convention. Because many believe that whatever he did was out of fashion and there's nothing in it for us to follow and that we should abandon. We should just jettison whatever we had believed earlier and that we should strike a new path. So that is I just posing a question to Mr. Chandrashekar as to whether he would have been half as successful now as he did decades ago. There is now a low emphasis on truth and convention, speed of the essence and in administration, rather than depth and adherence to rules and regulations. But then, is this not true, not merely of India, of the entire universe, where everybody wants to get ahead of the other person? These civil services in India are essentially a British creation. We have been both fortunate and unfortunate in having inherited this legacy left behind by the alien ruler. To glorify the past and criticize the present is flawed. From whatever I have read in Mr. Chandrashekhar's memoirs, the man stood for a blend of both. He's not totally conventional, at the same time he's not totally modern. I think he succeeded in blending the two and achieved what he did. In my view, this is the right prescription for the average civil servant at present times. His account of his career generates several questions. First, does the reaction to the civil services fulfill the needs of a dynamic economy like ours? Second, the relationship between a minister and civil servant. I always refer the parallel is between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. This is very true of many states. The minister and civil servant are invariably at loggerheads, and consequently, work in the administration suffers. So, how can it be made more balanced and not intimidating? I don't think many civil servants will admit that they have a very good relationship with the minister. That's only for public consumption. There are a lot of tensions, but then the relationship is one of intimidation. Since I got my boards 20 years ago, I used to say that 20 years ago, if you defied a minister, the penalty was only a transfer. But that is no longer the case. Even if somebody contradicts me, now there is physical intimidation of a civil servant who toes a line different from the minister, especially in economic decisions. The ambience has completely changed, and many civil servants have stopped working because any decisions made are subject to being questioned by not only by the minister, but agencies like what I headed. It's very unfortunate. The enforcement agencies have taken over the scene, and so every civil servant, especially at the top, is very slow in taking decisions. If you won't take any decisions if you can help it. So that's a scene which is very dismaying. Why do most civil servants take the easy path of less work and more pay? How grave is public servant corruption? This is again, not a day passes without newspapers reporting of some senior IAS, IPS officer getting caught for corruption. You can't wish it away, you can't dismiss it as a mere imagination or a mere case of witch hunt. I like, because whenever people say something about the CBI, saying it's full of politics. To put the record straight, if the CBI registers about 1,000 cases a year, only 5% of the cases ever have political overtones. And to say that everything which the CBI or any enforcement agency does is out of political machinations or political direction, this is very unfortunate, which is quite off the mark. But then, how grave is the public servant corruption is the question which I am asked very often. I dismiss it, and I dismiss any criticism, say that yes, partly some fiction goes into investigations, but mostly there is some material which the investigating agency has to pursue either themselves or on court directions. What do we do to mitigate public servant corruption? I would like to quiz Mr. Chandrashekar when his turn comes, when he is asked to give comments. I would like, because this may be a very negative approach to public administration, but every other day we hear people complaining about civil servant corruption. Civil servant, not at the highest level, even at the lower level, the corruption is immense, and this is probably giving a bad image to our country. And when I go abroad, very often people ask me, but I don't know what to say. I mean, I can't simply push it under the carpet, sweep it under the carpet. There's a lot of truth in civil servant corruption, that we can do anything. I don't hear of it in UK or US. Yeah, there are, not everybody there is straight, but the intensity of the problem is much lower than our country. How do we mitigate the situation? I mean, it'll be utopian to believe that you can completely eliminate corruption. But how do we act on it and ensure that corruption is minimum? And we are speaking of corruption at the cutting edge level. Cutting edge in the police, the constable, the sub-inspector. So how do we ensure that a citizen gets the service he is entitled to under the Constitution? How can he get that service without having to pay bribe. So this is what agitates my mind. I write very often about it, but nobody seems interested in the subject. So I possibly raised very fundamental issues that do not beget easy answers. Is this not a dilemma of modern public administration? I leave this issue for a debate that follows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Raghavan, for that very thoughtful and reflective contribution to the discussion. I am here as a moderator, but I also belong to the fourth pillar and of the state, and in your book, we don't come off very well because you're constantly accusing the media of sensationalizing things, of putting a spoke in the wheel of some programs. You mentioned RFD, which the media did something to upset by saying that the Prime Minister is now going to keep a watch on ministers. He's going to give marks, points to ministers. But before all that, before I launch into all that, I'd just like to, for the benefit of people who may not have read the book, I'll just quickly summarize the book, if I may. And I can do it in 5 minutes. I can do it in 5 minutes. Sorry, 1 second. So, as good as my word. It's a very engaging read, and I'll recommend it to all of you, particularly because most of you here are civil servants. And Mr. Chandrashekar, takes you through the roller coaster of a civil servant's career and all the serendipitous turns that it can take. And the remarkable thing about this book is, he has treated, he's very frank about things, and he talks about his good assignments and his bad assignments, but he also says that he approached all of these with the same spirit, let's go out and do it, and let's give it our best shot, and he seems to have treated each as a learning experience. And you have already been told about all his various postings, and each of these assignments, barring the ones at Titanium Corporation and as the district collector of Idukki, he describes one as a nondescript part of his career and the other as his worst. I think the Titanium Corporation, perhaps. He appears to have been fortunate, and this is the remarkable part about his career, in having had great relationships with his political bosses, his junior colleagues, his senior colleagues. He's turned, and he's also managed to turn every adverse situation into something better. For instance, a loss-making venture into a profit-making one, turning around something really bad, a bad situation into a good situation. I think, except that Titanium Corporation, which didn't go too well. And I found, actually, one of the most interesting parts of the book is his description of India standing its ground at the Doha Ministerial Conference of the WTO, led by the then Commerce Minister Mursoli Maran, and his own challenges, the author's own challenges in securing India's position as WTO ambassador. And, the whole battle for intellectual property, India's position on intellectual property rights at a time when India wanted to produce drugs for HIV and AIDS, and there was a great need for these drugs across the developing world. And, it struck me that he talks about how the developed countries came to these fora with a whole team of negotiators, and how we were not that well equipped. And it struck me that the same thing is perhaps going to happen to us in climate change negotiations, which are going to be very crucial. And we don't have that many specialist negotiators perhaps in government who know the subject and who can be strong in defending India's position. Of course, as one reads through the book, you eagerly wait for that cabinet secretaryship, which came from 2007 to 2011. And I'll be very frank and say that I began reading the book backwards. I went to that first, and then I decided to go to the other stuff later. And that period coincided with some of the big turning points in India's 75-year history: the global recession, the Mumbai terrorist attacks, the 2G scam, and the Commonwealth Games in 2010. And Mr. Chandrashekar also examines the role of the CAG. I think that's a very interesting part of the book, to raise questions, to raise some valid questions about its role in the 2G scam. And although he was not in office at this time, and in the coal scam. He also goes back to his own deposition before the JPC, which had created ripples at that time. He said he had advised the PM. I mean, this part of it was picked up by the media, and I think it was sensational. I agree that there was some sensationalism there, that he said he had advised the PM in 2007 to hike the entry fee for the spectrum allotment by as much as 4 times, as it could fetch the government more revenue. But he's made the full deposition available in the book. He had also told the JPC at the same time that only if the Department of Telecommunication had allotted the spectrum at below the prescribed entry fee, that was at that time the policy, or prevalent at that time, would there have been abandonment of revenue. And that this concept cannot be extended to revenue that might have accrued had the policy been different. He's quite categorical that the CAG does not have the right to question or lay down policy or calculate presumptive losses, and if the issue of presumptive losses is brought into audit, every budget, every finance, every welfare scheme, everything that the government does, every policy can be questioned. And in his opening remarks, Mr. Chandrashekar has already mentioned this, and in this book, it comes across very clearly. He pulls no punches about the country's situation now, when he says that the country's federal, democratic, secular character, as established in the Constitution, I wouldn't say that he said that they're coming under attack, but that they are not, that they have become more fragile than they ever were. So this is, in short, the summary of the book. And Mr. Raghavan has already asked him some questions. So I think we'll just segue from here into the questions. But I will... Actually, Mr. Raghavan has preempted my questions, but I'll repeat them again. A couple of questions. Reading your book, one comes away with the impression that that is the opposite of the general impression about the civil service, which is that they're a bunch of red tapists. I mean, this is the prevalent, okay, I mean, outside this room perhaps. A bunch of red tapists, careerists, time servers, or busy making retirement plans by trying to curry favor with the powers that be, or just simply lining their nests. To start off this discussion, I mean, it would be great, Mr. Raghavan has already asked this question, if you could just reflect on this reputation of the Indian civil services, not just here, but internationally, as a moribund, risk-averse organization that is the main obstacle to India achieving its full potential. And, this is, you have also remarked on how you tried your failure you see as your biggest failure was your, was your inability to bring about reforms in the administration. So if you can just reflect on this, and then we'll go to the next subject.
I hope it works. Now, there were some questions which Mr. Raghavan raised. One is, could you have achieved the same results in the present atmosphere? Well, I am not very sure that I would have reached those levels in the present system. I would basically, the entire system has changed. You are no longer empaneled on the basis of all the work that you have done reflected in your confidential reports. It is an entirely different system where there are some committees which keep talking to a number of unknown people, and they decide whether you're fit for the job or not. So that I'm not too sure whether I would have been there, because I would certainly have made quite a few enemies during the course of my earlier career. I matured over time and I became more friendly. So that is one. Now, so the present atmosphere, well, even if I had achieved all that, it would have been very difficult for me to survive, because to me there are certain values in administration, certain things which you need to do as an administrator. And now if those things are there, this is what I hear, I really don't, once I leave a job, I leave it totally. So I don't have much connection with what is going on, but what people tell me, that there is a general tendency, there's a general fear. I mean, you can't work if you are afraid. There is a fear that you will be sent back to the state. There will be a fear that you will be sent off from one ministry to the other. Not that this hasn't happened in the past. As you recall, Mr. E.A. Sharma was sent off from economic affairs to coal. He resigned and so on. It has happened in the past. But there seems to be a greater prevalence of that in the current atmosphere. So I am not too sure. And I also find that there is a reluctance among state officers to go to the center. That again is an indication of some change. Then whether the civil service serves a dynamic economy, I think it does. Because I think the entire reform of 1991, all the changes that have been made subsequent to 1991, the credit goes to the civil service, to the officers. I mean, I remember Ashok Lahiri telling me that I'm surprised about you people. I mean, you have given away all your powers after 1991, and you are sort of leading the entire exercise of limiting your own powers. Because I think once a thing is considered good, once a thing is resulting in some change in our system, in our economy, then we plunge into it, because it's good to see results. It's good to see institutions growing. It is good to see the country developing. It gives you an internal satisfaction which you don't get out of salaries or anything like that. The other point was about the minister-civil servant relationship. Now I think this is a relationship which you cannot avoid. It's a democracy. So there is, you are going to have difficulties with certain ministers, and you're going to find it easy. I have had some very good ministers. I've had one or two bad ministers also. Not too many, one or two. But one thing I have found in my service, that very early in your career, the politicians judge you. They tell you, they come to understand, is this fellow, can he be manipulated or not? If he cannot be, then they will keep a distance. They may still want you because you deliver results. But they will keep a distance and not at least do these things through you. Might be below you, there will be people who will be doing it. That happens. Then the other point which you mentioned was corruption. Actually, I had included one whole chapter, but 4,000 or 5,000 words on corruption. But my editor at that time, she thought that this is really not fitting into the biography. So that was eliminated. I hope that will come out in some other book. Basically, I think corruption is there everywhere. If you people have seen the movie Norway versus Mrs. Chatterjee, which is now there on Netflix, the whole thing is about corruption in the federal, in the Norwegian system for foster care, where a lot of money is given by the government and that is shared by the lawyers, by the officers involved. So, and Norway is the fourth best in the world, according to Transparency International, in terms of corruption. Least corruption. So corruption is there everywhere. It's not that we can eliminate corruption wherever we find it. But again, what Mr. Raghavan mentioned that I had mentioned earlier, if you give too much room to your agencies like CBI or Enforcement Directorate and so on, you may want them only to do a few things, but they will do a hell of a lot of other things. And that's going to create a tremendous amount of you. We heard today morning in the newspapers that this chap, Samir Wankade, who got Aryan Khan in trouble, he wanted 25 crore from Shah Rukh Khan. Now, that is the kind of thing that can happen at lower levels, and the corruption is certainly very high in India at the lower levels. And that's where, I mean, people also find it. It's also related to our judicial system. You see, if you are in a car, the policeman stops you, you don't have some paper or you have crossed a particular line or something. Would you rather go to court 25 times or would you rather pay him 500 rupees? That is a question each of us will have to ask for ourselves. This is the problem. And over a period of time, I think with more automation, with less regulation, we can overcome corruption to some degree. We will not eliminate it altogether. It's not going to happen anywhere in the world. Then Mr. Subramaniam mentioned about the media role, about RFD and so on. I think it was not a question, it was only an observation, no? It was only an observation. Now, was the role of CAG an observation or a question? Observation. Okay. Then civil servants, red tape, national, international, that was a question. Yeah. Now, it is the same question. The basic thing is, internationally, from what I have seen, we have a fairly good reputation. We are considered to be, one thing about India, I mean, after all, the problems for civil servants come from the people, from population. And if you look at the population civil servant ratio, India is among the lowest in the world. We are managing somehow. It means a tremendous amount of effort is going because, and we are maintaining a kind of administration in a highly democratized system. I think internationally we have that. Nationally, we have mixed image. Some people find us difficult. Some people find us the easiest to come to. As a matter of fact, I recall when I was a sub-collector, long time ago in the 1970s, we used to have the practice of settling civil disputes in the sub-collector's courtroom. Now, I remember a lawyer, fairly prominent lawyer, coming to me and saying that we rather come here because we will get some decision, right or wrong. usually just. But if we go to a civil court, it will take us hundreds of years. So that kind of thing we have done quietly. So the civil service, again, it varies from officer to officer. Some are awful. And you have mentioned some names, etc., of officers who have, and we see it daily. And today, and I completely agree with Mr. Raghavan on this, that this, this social media thing has become a great craze. I find them, on their photographs, this every small thing they do, they go to the bathroom, it's there in the social media. It's that kind of situation.
But that is something that is encouraged by the government. Every officer has to be on social media.
Every officer has to be. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I think...
Promote his work, basically.
To promote his work, but he's not promoting himself. So that's...
Promote his work and tag the Prime Minister.
So this is how it is. So I perhaps belong to the old school. But I feel that like many of us who are present here, Mr. Shivaraman, Mr. Narayanan, a lot of others who are present here, we've all worked quietly. And we have achieved results quietly. So this is what I had to say. I think I answered all.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask you, is the lateral entry system something that can make the civil service more able to deliver its goals, you think?
No. I think the lateral entry system means nothing, because for the simple reason that what you're thinking of doing is that take from the corporate sector and bring them into the public sector, and there will be a huge change. But we are forgetting the simple fact that public administration and corporate management are two different things. In corporate management, your results, the kind of objective you have to achieve is very clearly defined. You have to increase profit, your bottom line has to be good, and your stock value has to be high. The results are clear and everybody has to work according to that. In government, you don't have any single clear objective. You are dealing with health, you're dealing with education, you're dealing with finance, dealing with many different things. Public administration is totally different. Now, generally, I think, I will quote this if you don't mind. I keep quoting the former member Planning Commission, Mr. Arun Maira. He was a corporate manager, he was in the Tata Administrative Service, he was a consultant, and he was a member of the Planning Commission also. He wrote a book called An Upstart in Government. He says, I must admit that it is much harder to get tangible results in the government. I have to also explain that the scope of the government's responsibilities is much larger than that of any private sector company. To produce outcomes that are equitable and not only efficient in providing health services to all citizens, for example, is more difficult than selling medicines to only those who can pay the price that covers their cost of discovery and production. The government's job is not to make a profit. It is to improve the world for everyone. So the task is quite different. The objectives are quite different. And I don't think corporate managers are going to make any difference. We've tried those experiments before and not succeeded very well. But again, I say that I failed, and we have failed consistently till now, in making that systemic change that will result in giving, that will cause, I'm losing control of my words, that will bring about a result-oriented administration, where the results, the officers know, the minister knows, it is monitored from the top, from the Prime Minister downwards. And if we can have that, a lot of change can happen in administration.
So before I actually open this discussion to the floor, I just want to ask one more question, which is about, Mr. Raghavan also asked about the relationship between the political boss and the civil servant. Mrs. Gandhi once spoke about a committed bureaucracy. Today, and yesterday, the fifth civil servant was inducted into the cabinet, or became, it's not inducted into the cabinet, but was given, charge of law. And I just want to understand if you think that this is something that's going to make civil servants think that their future lies in being more committed, in the sense that Mrs. Gandhi wanted them to be committed.
Well, I think there will be some civil servants who will be very committed to whatever the system. And these are the people who will also change, when the system changes. But large majority of them will remain professional. I mean, that's the feeling I have. Of course, as I told you, the complexion of the administration is changing, and we are not. It's not what we were, or what we were trying to be, right from the start. In the academy in Mussoorie, we used to be told you have to be professional, you have to be careful about politicians, you have to be completely free, and you have to be, we were told we are the steel frame, which is not true, of course, even then. But that is not there. Today, I mean, I read somewhere that the present director of Mussoorie, of the academy, Rudra there was once a director. He said in the civil service day that actually administrative change started in India only in the year 2014.
Okay, with that, I will open this discussion to the floor. And is there somebody who will pass the mic around? Yeah, okay. So, any questions? Yeah.
There aren't many who defied the minister and still went on upwards. Well, my experience has been, I spent full 36 years in service. I just got in at 22 and retired at 58, so at the time. I defied ministers at every stage. In fact, one of my defiance led to the resignation of a chief minister. And he ultimately had to resign. And secondly, when I was revenue secretary, I defied my minister, who became his prime minister. And I defied the prime minister also. But it didn't come in my way, in any way. And in all my 36 years, the only minister with whom I clashed, of course he ceased to be a minister after 10 days, and very seriously I clashed with him. And in his own office, with my secretary, sitting beside me, I told my minister, I will disobey your orders. If you give me written orders, I will disobey it. So he didn't give me the written orders, but ultimately he gave written orders to somebody and CBI prosecuted them. It's a different issue. So it's not that secretaries or other officers, IAS officers, cannot defy a minister. They can defy a minister, but the way in which you have to defy a minister, the way in which you have to put forth your case will have to be logical and must be defensible at every place. Whether it is in the court or in the public, your stand must be completely justified. Then you can take up cudgels against a minister. I took up cudgels against Mr. Arjun Singh. I can say it very clearly. And it was Mr. Arjun Singh who brought me as Finance Secretary of Madhya Pradesh at the age of 39, 40. And he replaced a secretary who was 10 years senior to me. I defied him. I wrote a note against him. Ultimately, he had to resign. But it didn't come in the way of my relationship with Mr. Arjun Singh. When he became again a minister in the central government, he took me as joint secretary. At that time, I mean, at least he left the ministry, but he was. So there are very many equations you could see. As Chandrashekar rightly said, the politician judges you. When he judges you that you are a fair man, a just man, and an honest person, he will leave your side. He is not going to pressurize you. It's quite possible that he will start pressurizing your underlings and he will get his job done. But he will not pressurize you because he wants you also. He wants you also. So, I'm not written my autobiography, but once Mr. Narasimha Rao was asked, this man as Revenue Secretary, he's putting a lot of people into serious trouble. I can't say many things here openly. And why are you continuing him as Revenue Secretary? So he said, I want his face also in my government. So it's not that politicians don't judge you. It is not that politicians always do not want officers who do not comply with their orders. So in the civil service today, if you ask me, I am of vintage area, 1962 archaeological remain, you may say, but there are still 60 to 70% officers who are honest, who are clean, and who will do their job properly.
Sorry, you want to go first? No, I just want to ask a sort of follow-up question in a way. And that is, just as there is this debate about whether judges should accept sinecures after they retire, and that's pretty seriously debated. We don't ask this with the same earnestness about civil service. We talk of committed bureaucracies, but one way maybe to see that there is certain independence is to have a system where nobody takes a job afterwards. So I'm not casting any aspersions. I know that both of you have gone on to do other things and very successfully and very well after you were retired. I'm just asking the more systemic question, that do you think there would be greater faith in the civil service if we had a system of absolutely no sinecures after retirement, and extensions as well? Number one. Number two, just a brief question. I just want to know, as journalists, we've covered, government, and anyone who's covered central government will know that a lot of power now stems increasingly from the PMO. Do you think the role of the cabinet secretary is sort of been somewhat downgraded, and downgraded in a sort of negative way? And do you think it needs to be restored in some fashion? So, two questions.
Okay, the two questions. One is about judges not being judges are do get they become governors and so on.
I think he meant the whole bureaucracy.
And civil servants.
And yeah, you're talking about civil servants. You see, what really happens is that a civil servant, when he retires, has hardly anything, nothing at all. Now, I don't know how much Mr. Shivaraman had, but 8,000 rupees was your. He had 8,000 rupees in the bank. 8,000 rupees. I had, at the end of 41 years of service, what I had was 1 crore 65 lakhs, better than Mr. Shivaraman. And a pension which was equal to half my salary. Now, when we were in government, we managed well because we had system support. Now, after you leave government, you have no system support. So finally, you have to make do, you have to find some way of achieving. If we get enough, if the government, either both for judges and for civil servants, make sure that they are reasonably well off, then automatically I think you can completely scrap the system. But then the people you get for these jobs may be not that good also. There are all kinds of people, even going as governors and so on, even today. So I don't think you can really come to a firm decision like this in the present circumstances. The second point is Cabinet Secretary downgraded. Well, I think the position of Cabinet Secretary has varied in importance from time to time. It depends a great deal on the personality of the cabinet secretary, as well as the kind of confidence that the Prime Minister had in him. So once that is there, the cabinet secretary automatically will become important. And if he is willing to take on responsibility, he is willing to plunge into things, then automatically that position will come back. Today, I think it is more a PMO-oriented system. That is fact. So the cabinet secretary will be less significant. In various other times, as all of them will say who have been here for a long time, there have been really effective cabinet secretaries, and there have been dead losses also.
Greetings, sir. This is Daniel from United Nations Peace University. Question to Chandrashekar, sir. So in soon after the independence, maybe Jawaharlal held democracy and other values, similar value system high, because that time, as per the Maslow's theory, we are in the least. And today it's not the same. However, the change in the demography, what we see in the Europe, and what we see in Africa, what we see in the South Asia, we don't see in Angola. What we see in entire Africa, we don't see in Angola. What we see in Asia, we don't see in Japan. The reason being, these two countries never give visas to Muslim. Now, this is the base. Question is, 2.4 billion Christians sporadically scattered over 100 plus countries. 1.9 billion Muslims living tentatively 56, 57 countries. 1.05 Hindus, the global minority living in one country, do not have WCC, World Church Council. They do not have any other topmost institutions to impact or to have the say in the governance, similar to OIC. And the second part, challenge to OIC, that's where the Osama came and within one Sudani. Now what they have failed. Giving the scenario, soon after the independence, in that scenario, democracy is good. And democracy have been embraced by mass because they didn't have the regimental essence in their faith system. Today, the percentage increase. Is it not necessary to uphold, similar to Norway, all the top performing countries, Netherlands and New Zealand, is it not necessary for India to retain the peace and to protect the global minority, the Hindus? Is it not necessary to India to have the essence of Hinduism in the governance? It's my question.
Difficult question. Difficult question. I think Hinduism is very much there in the government. There is no doubt about that. But what I do feel is that whether it is in Norway, whether it is in England, whether it is anywhere else, there may be a particular religious denomination which has a particular role in governance which is considered to be the state religion or whatever it is. Like Nepal has Hindu. It is a Hindu state. Now, in our country, with so much diversity in every possible way, we have Christians, we have Hindus, we have Muslims, we have Sikhs, we have people of different languages. I feel that I think the system that we are following, which is being independent of religion, doing your governmental functions, each person has the right to follow whatever religion he wants. We don't have a church. I mean, Hinduism is, I've read a lot on Hinduism. No? I've done Vedanta. If you read the last chapter of my book, it is all that. I had mentioned it to Ms. Subramaniam also. I've done a lot of work on that. But our religion is different. Hinduism, if you call it Hindu philosophy, is different. What is Hindu philosophy? Hindu philosophy is itself that everybody, all of us, are part of the same one absolute. Absolute. That is our religion. And that is the concept that is how secularism fits into our system. And I think that is what is good for the country. It has worked for the country. What has worked for the country, why do you want to change it?
Yeah.
I'll be very brief. I think I have not seen KM in the cricket field at Masuri, but post-retirement, hey, I don't. But post-retirement, we formed a nice WhatsApp group solely on cricket, avoiding governance. So that's the story. But this book is very exhaustive. I must compliment you on taking so much time and carefully crafting the book. I think the early years are said much better than the later years, as they are bound to be. And then I think you recall there was a time when you called me up and asked about one particular officer to go to, I don't know, CABSEC, I think, CAB Secretariat as additional sec. And at that time, I do recall, I was quite surprised getting that call from you, and for various reasons, as you well know. But it was that kind of informal network within the service where you got inputs. So I don't see anything very wrong about asking opinions, but you should know how to filter them and use them properly. That's about an issue which came up. I think his trade-related experience, which he's mentioned, is extremely interesting. In particular, he's very humble, actually. He's put up all those notes to the ministers, and he passes on all the compliments to the ministers. But I must say the insights are very useful, and they tell you. I understand his, sadness to see the global order disappear, literally post-Trump and whatnot. And I think on the CAG reports, Mr. Shivaraman is also there. He is an expert. Now, I think there is a bit of a gray area there. You're referring to the court decision to avoid commenting too much on a cadre, I think, and if I see it right. But it seems to me that, yes, there is a very gray line there on presumptuous loss versus what could be considered an auction loss and so on. I think we have to tread very carefully. You bring the same point, you highlight the same point on gas pricing, and I can see your upset there, and you leave it at that. Fortunately, I don't think we can all comment any further on that. Sorry, it's still going on. Yep. Now, one thing I missed was public sector decline in that phase. BSNL, Air India, all going out of shape, really. And I don't know why you have no reference to that particular area, why it happened. I mean, later on you see how BSNL declined and so on. The performance review concept, I don't know whether it's absolutely new. All of us ran performance budgets at one point, trying to run it through departments and so on. But as you said rightly, it was finance department driven, so maybe didn't get accepted really. The ARC, you have expressed disappointment on the way it went. I also think the ARC comes up with a lot of recommendations, all of which, goes here and there, and not much. There's one thing on the national security issue in the book, which I thought was rather discouraging, particularly the Mumbai incident, where, the sequence of events seems to suggest there was a major intelligence failure, the way you have described it. I don't know much about this, but it seems to suggest that what the heck were these guys doing, and the CABSEC was completely in the dark. And that's what I gleaned. Maybe you can clarify. But those are the few observations I have had.
So we'll just take one.
Yeah.
Just keep it brief, sir.
Yeah, sure. Whatever. No, actually, I've spent 45 years in corporate world. So when you say that from corporate we can't come to civil service, I think Mr. Nandan Nilekani has proved, with the Aadhaar, even though he may not be in the secretary level, he was in a very senior level. I think, he has really delivered in that sense. So I think, we should not ignore that. That is not possible. The second point, sir, that, today in a fast-changing world, the speed is important, okay? And unfortunately, if you don't react quickly, in today's world, I think, we are going to fall way behind. And that's why, today, everything is more time bound. I mean, just look at it today. The passport you are getting in 1 week or things like that, which was not the case before. So I think, today, the public perception is that we want results immediately because everything is online. Today, everything is possible for us to track on other, whatever it is. So I think that is very important. So I thought I'll tell them. Thanks.
No, I agree. If you read my book, I have spoken about Nandan Nilekani, and I think he made a huge difference. I mean, because we all tried, we didn't know what to do. He came and solved it for us. And there are people who can make differences like that. He should be there. He came as a minister level. He should be at the minister level. That kind of, there are people. I mean, I think a person like, say, N. Chandrashekar, for example, he can do a lot. But just taking people at joint secretary level and all, with the system remaining as it is, it will not have any impact. And on the other hand, they will get totally disgusted, disappointed, and we will get disappointed with them. We will never sort of meld with them. It won't work out. Now, speed of action is, of course, necessary. I agree that there should be speed of action. And wherever I think electronically we are going, there is some speed of action coming. But we should at the same time remember that a large part of our population, including me, including my wife in particular, are completely computer illiterate. So we have a great deal of difficulty. And another thing is, in a recent seminar, I'm sorry, I'll take 2 minutes for this.
No, please go ahead.
2 minutes, 2 minutes. At a recent seminar, I came to know the difference between digitization and digitalization. Now, digitization means translating your present procedures, just putting the same procedure onto the internet. Well, digitalization means a fundamental change. If digitalization happens, there is speed. Digitization means many of us will not be able to do it. So that's...
I'll just have one observation, sir. Sir, I'm Tirumurthy, I'm this side.
That's it.
Sir, when I was secretary in Delhi, I had in the social media side, I had a Twitter handle which said Secretary ER. So when I wrote about something, one of the people who reacted, so he said that, do you have a name and do you have a photograph of yourself? So I replied back in the Twitter itself that I believe in the faceless bureaucrat. So he said, sir, these days we want to know both the name and the photo also. So I just realized at that time that now the people have different expectations from the bureaucracy. They want to know them. And they want, so therefore sometimes when bureaucrats come on to the social media, it's not a bad thing actually. That people actually get to know them, there is greater transparency. And in fact, this was used by Srimati Sushma Swaraj in a very effective way, where she made every embassy or mission of ours open it so that even any person going to that country could tweet and ask for help. Yeah, just an observation, sir.
So as a moderator, can I just
have the last word,
have
yes.
the last word, and in response to Mr. Tirumurthy's input about social media, it's, I think, as a journalist, what it has done from the Prime Minister downwards is that it has started this trend of bureaucrats, politicians, Prime Minister, everybody speaking directly to the people, and it almost seems as if there is no need for journalists anymore. And which is why I think a lot of the issues that have arisen in journalism are perhaps because of this, the desire to speak directly to the people without some kind of filtration process in between, where you can distinguish the chaff from the grain, perhaps. That this is my opinion. There are bigger people sitting here, Mr. N. Ravi from The Hindu, Mukund is here from The Hindu as well, ex-editor. So maybe they have other views, but we have to close now, and I'm handing over the mic to Mr. Chandrashekar.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Usually it is been there, done that, seen everything. And here we had a very frank discussion on what we've done, but what we have not done also, and where we have failed and what we need to do. I think these are the kind of dialogues that we need to have to be, to really get to the heart of things. My thanks, sir, to Mr. Chandrashekar, who has come down from Trivandrum to be with us today. Thank you, sir. Your frankness in which you talked about governance, and I've been part of it under your leadership too when we did the census. So thank you, sir, for coming down. Thank you.
Having me here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Raghavan. That was an extremely thought-provoking intervention by you. It has been nice that even though you've hung up your boots 2 decades ago, you still keep active interest and keep writing on governance and on social issues, and we see you often in the press. Thank you very much for attending this session of CIC. You've been constantly supporting us, and I hope you continue to do so. And of course, a very able moderator, Nirupama, you have really kept the whole conversation together. And I'm sorry that I had to intervene at the end because I know my audience, 7:30 and they start fidgeting, and therefore all good things must come to an end. But a few housekeeping announcements. We have a very interesting panel next week. Mr. Vagul and Mr. Sridharan will be talking with Mr. Sheshasai on the banking sector. That promises to be a good session. I hope many of you will be back for that session. After that, we have another on an alternative approach to development. We have 3 eminent development economists taking part in that conversation. I hope you're there for that too. In June also we have a busy calendar. We'll get back to you on that. So thank you for coming, and thank you very much for those insightful questions. In fact, if you have more, I'm sure the panelists will be here to take them offline. So with that, we bring this session to a close. Once again, thank you.